Just when you thought Gonzaga's offseason couldn't get any sweeter, they get another dude, and it sets them up perfectly for the future.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy post-Memorial Day weekend, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, folks, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, Braden Smith is officially a Zag. It's been something we've talked about a handful of times on the show. Expected that commitment to come in a short amount of time. Of course, it did about 5 minutes after I hit the road for a weekend getaway with some friends. So we're talking about it a couple days later than we typically would have. We're going to talk about what his commitment means for Gonzaga. We're going to talk about what it means for the future, the fact that he is redshirting, what that might mean for Gonzaga's roster in 2025-26 and beyond, as well as how it might impact Gonzaga's recruiting, as they are targeting a lot of Zags, or a lot of guards, in that 2025 recruiting class. We're also going to close out the show talking about a new walk-on who has joined Gonzaga's team as a preferred walk-on, and then a junior college transfer guard that Lisa Fortier and the Gonzaga women's basketball team secured a commitment from this weekend as well. Lots happening. 3 new Zags over Memorial Day weekend. They love packing those kind of news things in over the holidays, but very, very, very excited about Braden Smith. And for those of you who listened to last Tuesday's episode, or I think it was a week before that, as well as I think the third time we've talked pretty extensively about Braden Smith on the podcast, you know the reasoning, you know, kind of the optimism, what this looks like. I'll give a little rundown on who Braden Smith is. If you're thinking, what, isn't that the name of that guard from Purdue? Yep, different Braden Smith, different guard here. This is a 6-foot guard from the Colgate. Now, he's initially from Seattle. He played high school basketball at Seattle Prep. Then he went to Colgate in the Patriot League, played 2 years there. This past season, he was the Patriot League Player of the Year after averaging 12.5 points, 5.6 assists, 5.5 rebounds, and 1.9 steals per game. Now, he wasn't a great three-point shooter last year. He shot about 31%. That was on about 5 attempts per game, though. The previous year, as a freshman, he only took 2.8 attempts per game, but he did shoot 36%. So I think there's a decent amount of optimism. Now, Ryan Nembhard was somewhat similar, and the comparisons between Nembhard and Braden Smith are going to exist in part because Braden Smith is going to directly replace Ryan Nembhard as the team's starting point guard, but you also just stylistically, if you've watched clips or any kind of tape of Braden Smith, you will see what we're talking about, why he looks like Ryan Nembhard, just stylistically, the way he gets up and down the floor. He's a deft passer. He's a smart decision maker. Like, there's a lot of comparisons, easy ways to see. Mark Few loves this type of point guard. I mean, that's the reason that they landed Ryan's brother before him. Like, this is the kind of player that they want at that position. And so for Braden Smith, you'll see those kind of comparisons. And one of them was that Ryan Nembhard was a good three-point shooter earlier in his career, was kind of okay his second year at Creighton, and then struggled a little bit last year. Ideally, that will not be the situation for Braden Smith. And I want to talk about the redshirt aspect of it. Now, Smith was pursued by some other programs. UW was going to bring him on for a visit, and reportedly told him not to visit right before he was scheduled to come out because they landed a commitment from a transfer guard from North Dakota instead. It sounds like Smith did take a visit to Cal in that period of time as well, came to visit Spokane, and ultimately ended up committing to Gonzaga. That was kind of the way that this was trending for a while. But the big story was the fact that he was going to redshirt. And my understanding of the situation is that Gonzaga effectively told him, we want you, we're recruiting you, we would love to have you on board next year, but if you come to Gonzaga, the plan is for you to redshirt this upcoming season. And he basically said that. He had great quotes. I read the article in the Spokesman Review, basically talking about how he started to see it as an opportunity, an ability to grow, and not a year of sitting out, but a year of getting better, a year of development. And that's how Gonzaga pitched it to him. And Gonzaga's got a pretty great pitch for that. Look at Kelly Olynyk. He's the best example. And I know it's been over a decade now since the Kelly Olynyk experience happened. And I know that makes me and many of you feel quite old. and we just have to accept that that's part of the deal. But Kelly Olynyk redshirted during his Gonzaga career. He'd already played 2 seasons, voluntarily redshirted. I guess I don't know how that conversation went, but opted to redshirt, spent an entire year developing behind the scenes. We didn't really know what was happening. We'd seen for 2 years, Kelly had looked okay, but he looked raw. He had grown like 9 or 10 inches in high school. So he's trying to play like a guard, but the coordination wasn't really there. He didn't have the strength to be a back to the basket player. He spent a year developing behind the scenes. And before the season, Mark Few said, hey, Kelly's going to be one of our best players next year. That was a team that had Elias Harris. That was a team that had Kevin Pangos. Like, that was a really good basketball team. And it was like, there's no way Kelly's going to be the best player on that team. Well, he was. He was an All-American. Lottery pick. Still in the NBA to this day. Captain for Team Canada as they go to the Olympics. Like, it was a tremendous growth year. Gonzaga's also done this with transfers who've come in, who've sat a year in the era where they had to sit a year, like Nigel Williams-Goss. We're going way back. You got Dan Dickow. You have Kyle Wiltshire. You have Brandon Clark. Like, there are tons of examples of players, Jonathan Williams, of players coming to Gonzaga, sitting out a year because in those situations they had to per NCAA rules, and then blossoming into absolute stars. Most of those guys were already good before they transferred to Gonzaga, but they still emerged better, more comfortable in Gonzaga's offense, and we really saw them shine. So Gonzaga's pitch to Braeden Smith was basically that list of guys. Look at what has happened in this program. Yes, you have to sit out a year in the midst of your career, but you're not just sitting around not doing anything. You are in practice going up against Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman and Caleb Battle and Emmanuel Innocenti and these very talented guards. You are learning the offense. I think the biggest part about this, what excites me the most, is anybody who watched Gonzaga basketball last year knows that this was the case. It took Ryan Nembhard roughly half a season to really finally get the feel of Gonzaga's offense. He said as much. This is not like, we're not making this up. He said this. He indicated, yeah, it took me a while. And part of that was, like, for him, all new teammates. And some of those other teammates hadn't also played in Gonzaga's offense, like Graham Ike. Anton Watson was in a slightly different role. Nolan Hickman was in a slightly different role. Like, Dusty Stromer obviously was kind of thrust into the starting lineup. He hadn't played game action in that offense before. So it wasn't just Nembhard, certainly. But for next year's roster, after this upcoming season, Braden Smith will step into a starting role with a lot of unfamiliar faces around him. We'll talk more in the second segment about who's going to be back for that team after this upcoming year, but we know a lot of guys are going to be gone. And Mark Few did not want to have a season where he had a starting point guard who had never been in the system playing with a bunch of new players, because it didn't go very well last year. Once they hit their stride, last year's team was incredible. They continued the Sweet 16 streak. They looked fantastic, but it took a while. We remember the UW game, the San Diego State game, the UConn game, the Santa Clara game. Like, there was some really rough stretches last season. So now Mark Few says that's not going to be a deal. That's not going to be a situation we run into. Braden Smith's going to hit the floor in his first game in the 2025-26 season, ready to go. He's going to have a full-on grasp of the offense. And for people who are concerned, and I heard this sentiment on the Discord channel, I saw it on Twitter, I've had it in conversations with friends, there's a concern that Gonzaga didn't use this roster spot in a way to help the team next season. For starters, Gonzaga already has, the rotation is set. They weren't going to add anybody in the transfer portal or a 2024 freshman who is likely to make a big impact on the roster next year anyway. And I am happy to argue that Braden Smith's just being there in practice is going to make Gonzaga better than a player, adding a late international recruit like they did with Krajinovic or Pavle Stosic. Like, Braden Smith being there, even though he can't play next season assuming they continue to redshirt him, he is going to be a better impact for Gonzaga than some of those other players might have been, because he's going to push Ryan Nembhard in practice. He's going to make him better. He's going to make Nolan Hickman better. He's going to make Caleb Battle better. He's going to make those guys better basketball players. He's going to make them more prepared for the opponent because of his skill set in practice. And more importantly, and the main reason this is happening is not for next season, it's for the year after that. And that's what I want to talk about in the second segment. What does this mean for Gonzaga's roster in that 2025-26 season, as well as the year beyond that? And how might the decision for Braden Smith to come to Gonzaga and redshirt impact Gonzaga's pursuit of multiple top targets in the 2025 recruiting class? We're going to talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, it is playoff time in the NBA and NHL. They are close to wrapping up. Baseball, of course, is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 in your pocket. You can use it on spreads, player props, money lines, anything that you want, and all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And if you want to get ahead of the game, 2025 national championship odds are already out. Gonzaga opened at plus 3,000. They are now at plus 1,800. So get in while the getting is good. Drop that money down. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and help make sure your first bet is an automatic W. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking about Gonzaga's addition of Colgate transfer guard Braeden Smith, who is planning to redshirt for the upcoming 2024-25 season. That will give him 2 years of eligibility for the 2025-26 season, and then again, if he chooses to return the 2026-27 season. That puts Braden Smith in a situation to be in Spokane at Gonzaga for 3 years, playing those final 2 seasons. Now, looking ahead at the future, this upcoming season, 24-25, when Braden Smith will be redshirting, it will be the final season in Spokane for Ben Gregg, for Michael Ajayi, assuming he ends up at Gonzaga. We will talk about that later this week, as he has until Wednesday at 9 p.m. Pacific time to make his decision on whether he's going to stay in the draft process or come to Gonzaga. If he does come to Gonzaga, this upcoming season will be his final year. So Ben Gregg, done after this year. Michael Ajayi, done after this year. Nolan Hickman, Ryan Nembhard, Caleb Battle, all 3 of Gonzaga's primary guards for this upcoming season, gone. All of those guys will not be in the mix, barring an injury that causes them to redshirt or something like that. They're not going to be in the mix. They're going to be gone. That means of Gonzaga's current roster, current scholarship roster, the players who can be, I should say, in the mix for the 2025-26 season are Graham Ike, Braden Huff, Dusty Stromer, Steele Venters, Emmanuel Innocenti, and now Braden Smith. 6 guys. Let's talk about them. The biggest question mark, hands down, is Graham Ike. If Graham Ike puts together another All-American caliber season this upcoming year, which is entirely possible, like Ryan Nembhard, he struggled a little bit early in the year, had to have a come-to-Jesus moment where Mark Few said, you need to start demanding the basketball. We want to get you the basketball. You want to get the basketball. Let's make it happen. Let's find a way to make sure that you're getting your touches. You're getting your 18 to 20 to 22 points a game. You're getting your 10 board. You're doing it on efficient scoring. And then once that conversation happened, Graham Ike took off. The numbers that he put together from that San Diego State game through the end of the year, All-American caliber numbers. If he can do that for a full season and avoid the foul trouble, various things like that, he can be an All-American. He can be in that conversation. All WCC player of the year, which he should have won last year. He can be that guy. But it probably doesn't put him in the NBA. Just like it didn't put Drew Timme in the NBA. Because he doesn't have the lateral mobility to be a switchable defender at the next level. And he doesn't have the outside shooting. Now, he knocked down some threes last year. He looked better as a three-point shooter than Drew Timme, although I think some people have maybe over-exaggerated Graham Ike's ability to hit threes. He was okay at it, but it's not really a huge part of his game. He's an okay free throw shooter, not great. Ultimately, Graham Ike's age, his injury history, his style that he plays probably doesn't lead to him being an NBA player. Maybe he gets looks. Maybe he gets a two-way contract. He might make it in some capacity, but he's probably not going to leave early after this upcoming season to go to the NBA draft. That doesn't mean he's not going to leave after this upcoming season, though, because he'll have been in college for 6 years. He's already got the COVID year of eligibility. If he wanted to use that final year, it'd be him using his COVID eligibility. He's got the extra year because he missed an entire year with a medical redshirt coming off of that foot injury. Does Graham Ike want to spend 6 years in college? I wouldn't blame him if he didn't. If he has a fantastic year next year and doesn't think there's anything left for him to prove, which is very possible. If he puts together a year similar to last year again, what does he have to prove? What more could he do? He could come back and work on his three-point shot, et cetera, but his age is going to be such a negative that I don't think he's really got a chance to boost his draft stock in a significant way. That's not to say I think Graham Ike should leave after this upcoming year. I have no idea. NIL will be a factor. If he doesn't think he's going to make the NBA, if scouts aren't telling him that they're planning to draft him, we'll invite you to summer league. Maybe you can sneak on two-way, whatever. And he's looking at EuroLeague and looking at options to play professionally overseas. And Gonzaga says, here's X amount of money to come back for another year, be big man on campus, compete to be an All-American again. Maybe he does come back. It's way too early to know. But that's the biggest question mark facing Gonzaga after this upcoming season. We know the guys who are going to be gone. We know the majority of the rest of the guys are probably going to be back. As much as we can feel confident about that in the modern era of college basketball. Because outside of Graham Ike, it's Braden Huff, whose future at Gonzaga kind of depends on what Graham Ike does in that situation. It's Dusty Stromer, it's Emmanuel Innocenti, and it's Steele Venters. I think Dusty comes back. Obviously, if he doesn't play very much next year, maybe he'll consider exploring the transfer portal. Wouldn't necessarily blame him for that, but the path to playing time is not necessarily clear for him this upcoming season, but it is much clearer the year after that when Battle and Nembhard and all those guys are out of the mix. Innocenti is basically here to be here for a couple of years, so there's not really any risk of him leaving. Venters is in a somewhat similar situation with Graham Ike, and I do think it depends how much he plays this year. If he's just buried on the bench and he's healthy and he wants to contribute and he's not getting that opportunity, maybe he does look somewhere else for his final year. If he plays really well and decides, you know what, that was great, that was a fun year, I've been in college long enough, I'm done, I'm moving on, great. But he could also be here for the next 2 years as well. So there's a lot of question marks. Again, it's the modern era of college basketball. Every roster needs to be re-recruited every year. But there's a real chance that Gonzaga is looking at a roster in 2025-26 that has Graham Ike, Steele Venters at the 3, Dusty Stromer at the 2, Braden Smith at the 1, and then Emmanuel Innocenti as a backup guard. You don't have a power forward in that lineup. You could try to start Huff. I have a feeling Mark Few is not going to want to start Ike and Huff. If Ike leaves, Braden Huff steps into that starting center role, and you still have a great lineup. You just have Huff replacing Ike. You still need a power forward. That's why Gonzaga is pursuing Nick Kamenia, by the way. Top prospect in the 2025 class, guy who's been on campus twice already, was here for craziness in 2022. On an unofficial visit, was here for craziness in the kennel in 2023. On an official visit, he's a 6'8", stretch 4. He is near lock to make the Team USA U18 team right now. He is one of the best players in his recruiting class in the country. Gonzaga identified him years ago because they are really good at this. They are really good at recruiting and identifying talent and finding guys who blossom later in their college career. Gonzaga is identifying Nick Kamenia as a guy who could fill that power forward spot. I don't know if they're necessary. They're certainly not promising him a starting spot in 2025 if he came to campus, but the writing is there for him to start at 4. That's why Gonzaga is heavily pursuing Nick Kamenia. That's why he's in the mix. If they don't get him, if they have an empty spot at the power forward, they'll hit the transfer portal and they'll find somebody to fill that kind of Ben Gregg role on this team. To get to the point about how this impacts 2025 recruiting, because it doesn't really impact Nick Kamenia, but I got questions, some of them direct mailbag questions, which, by the way, we will answer the rest of the mailbag questions on Wednesday's episode of Locked On Zags. So if you asked a question that didn't get answered today, we are going to get to it later this week. But a lot of people were asking about how Braden Smith could impact Gonzaga's pursuit of other guards in the 2025 class. Namely, Jalen Haralson, who is set to visit Gonzaga. He said he's planning to visit Gonzaga, but hasn't set a date. Davis Fogle, who is visiting Gonzaga over Hoop Fest weekend. And Isaiah Harwell, who's been a longtime target for Gonzaga, who visited back in February. Here's the deal about those 3 guys. None of them are point guards. None of them are point guards. Davis Fogle is probably the closest to being a point guard, but he went from 6'5" to 6'7". And based on where he's like a top 75 prospect, he's a good player. And I think he's going to move up the rankings. Most Gonzaga targets do. But at this point right now, Davis Fogle is not in I'm going to go somewhere where I'm going to start right away at point guard day one. That's not really if that's what he wants, which kudos if that's what you want, he's not going to a Gonzaga level program. He's just not. That's not where he's going to end up. He could end up at a mid-major program or even lower high major programs potentially and be in that position. But he's not really in a spot to for lack of a better word, demand that. Jalen Haralson and Isaiah Harwell are top 10 prospects in what is considered a strong recruiting class in 2025. Those are 2 dudes who are probably starting wherever they go as true freshmen in 2025, but they're not point guards. So Braden Smith being the presumed starting point guard for Gonzaga in the 25-26 season should not impact them. In fact, in my mind, it should help. It is a sign to them of like, hey, we have somebody for you. We have somebody here. You are going to start alongside them. This, because right now Gonzaga's roster outside of in the backcourt is pretty much empty outside of Emmanuel Innocenti going into the upcoming season. And so it was like, hey, we want you. We want to bring you in, but these guys don't even know who they're going to play with. Now it's like, hey, we have a point guard for you. We got a big for you in Braden Huff, potentially Graham Ike as well. We got some wings for you in Dusty and Steele Venters. Now we got a point guard for you in Braden Smith. You come in, you fill that 2 spot. You're our guy. Mr. Harwell, you want to come in, you want to play combo guard. You can play alongside Braden Smith. Both of you guys can kind of interchange at the point guard. If Harwell really wants to play that position, they could throw him in there. You got a sharp shooting wing in Steele Venters. You got an experienced defensive level guard in Dusty Stromer alongside you. You got a back to the basket dominant force in Graham Ike or Braden Huff, depending on who's that starting center. We got a whole roster around you. We want you to come in and fill this spot and be awesome right away. You're a top 10, top 5 prospect for a reason. You're a one and done candidate. If that's who you want to be, you're going to have the ball in your hands a lot. We got a perfect distributor for you. We got floor spacers around you. We got anchors down on the block. This is the pitch they can make to Isaiah Harwell and Jalen Haralson. And Braden Smith is a part of that pitch. I don't think him being in the mix is a negative for those guys. And for the record, if they see it that way, then they're not fits for Gonzaga, frankly. If Harwell or Haralson or Fogle or anybody else says, I insisted on being the starting point guard from day one, and Gonzaga bringing in a guy who's going to start at point guard means I don't want to go there, fine. Then they go somewhere else. Like, then that's what happens. Like, then they weren't the right person for this team, for this fit. Braden Smith sacrificed a year of his college basketball career to get better behind the scenes, to step into a starting role. That's what being a Zag is. That's what being in this system, playing for Mark Few is. You bet on yourself, and you bet on that coaching staff to give you that development that you need to get where you need to go. Look how it's worked for, we talked about the sit-out guys, but look how it's worked for Braden Huff or Ben Gregg or Anton Watson. Like, it has worked for Nolan Hickman. It has worked for these guys to develop in this system. If these freshmen don't want to do that or feel threatened by Braden Smith, they're not right fits for the program anyway. I hope that it's not the case. I hope Gonzaga lands one of Harwell or Haralson, has that guy slot into that two guard position next to Braden Smith with Dusty and Steele on the wing. That sets up Gonzaga really nicely in that 2025-26 season. Well, folks, Braden Smith was not the only new Zag over Memorial Day weekend. The team brought in a preferred walk-on. We're going to talk about Noah Holland and why he is more than just a legacy addition for the Zags coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking Zag additions for the Memorial Day weekend here. We talked Braden Smith getting committed to Gonzaga, what it means for them this upcoming season as he works through practices and helps make this team better, what it means for them beyond that, what it means for Gonzaga recruiting. And now what I want to do is talk about 2 other additions, one on the men's side, one on the women's side, that we found out about over Memorial Day weekend. The first is Noah Holland. Holland is a 6'9", 245-pound forward. He is joining Gonzaga as a preferred walk-on. What that means is he's not taking up a scholarship. Gonzaga's got 13 scholarship spots. There's not really a roster limit outside of that. They can have as many walk-ons as they want. There's limitations on how many can travel to games and various other things. They're not going to just have like 40 guys on the roster. But in case you're like, well, how does this math work? Blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter. He's not taking up a scholarship spot. He can come hang out. He can come be on the team. That's the situation. Holland is from Allen Hancock Junior College. Now, he played high school basketball in the state. He was a very, very good player in the state of Washington. And then he went over to the Allen Hancock Junior College. It's in Santa Maria, California. He spent the past 3 years there. He missed his sophomore year with a Lisfranc injury, the same injury that Chet Holmgren had that took him out for a year. So in case you're wondering if that's going to linger, clearly wasn't an issue for Chet. And that was the 22-23 season for Holland. He played this past season. It was his junior year, his second year playing for the team. Last year, he averaged 7.8 points, 3.6 rebounds, shot 62% from the field. For his career, he played 57 total games at Allen Hancock. He averaged 7.5 points and 4 rebounds. So basically about the same numbers as a freshman and as a junior, with missing that year in the middle. Holland is a legacy. And what I mean by that is his father, Dale, played 56 games for Gonzaga from 1985 to 1987. He was there on the first years of Dan Fitzgerald, the legendary Gonzaga basketball coach's career. He played 56 games, averaged 10 points and 6.7 rebounds, was one of the better players on some of Fitz's first teams at Gonzaga. Holland's mother, Robin, was a volleyball player at Gonzaga as well. So Noah has significant connections to Gonzaga. Like I said, he played high school basketball on the other side of the state, and then he went to junior college, spent 3 years there, gets this opportunity to be a preferred walk-on for Gonzaga. This is great. It doesn't make a huge impact on the roster in terms of like making the team dramatically better right away, but anytime you can add a 6'9", 250-pound walk-on, that's a big dude. That's a big, strong dude who's going to be able to push guys in practice. He's going to make things better for Ben and for Braden and for Graham and for all those guys in the front court. They added some size, some strength, somebody who's going to make the practice squad better. I mean, again, you already had Braden Smith to the practice squad. That's a huge addition for this upcoming season in terms of making players better in practice. But so is Noah Holland. And this is great. I'm all about this. Super happy to hear it. Super happy to see Gonzaga adding legacies like this. Somebody who's got family connections to the program. That's always just fun. And it's a nice thing to be able to do. And when it comes to a player who happens to have the size and, experience of a 3-year junior college player, great. That's just a win-win-win. He becomes the 4th walk-on for Gonzaga next year, the 2nd newcomer outside of Cade Orness. Cade Orness from North Kitsap High School, played against Davis Fogle in high school. Fantastic scoring guard. He's a 6'4" guard as well. So you got Orness joining the team as a new walk-on. You now have Holland joining the team as a new walk-on. They're going to be joined by, of course, Joe Few, who's coming back, and Joaquim Arias Moore, a.k.a. Q, who did not play last season, did not dress last season, but was a walk-on on the team last year and presumably is going to be back again this year. I want to close out the show talking about an addition on the women's side as well. Since we're talking junior college additions, Lisa Fortier and the Zag women's basketball team lands Vera Günyadin. She is from Turkey initially. She's a 5'9" point guard with 2 years of eligibility left. She played 32 games at South Georgia Tech Junior College. Not Georgia Tech, South Georgia Tech. Junior college, way out there. Last year, she averaged 13 points, led the team with 5.2 rebounds per game as a 5'9" guard. She shot 42% from the floor. She shot 33% from three. Coach Fortier had a great quote in the press release released by Gonzaga's athletic department. Every time the women's team adds a new player, Coach Fortier has a quote about them. It's kind of a nice way to get to know their thought process around the recruitment of certain players. This is Coach Fortier's direct quote. She said, "We were immediately drawn to Vera because of her ability to shoot the ball from distance and her commitment to being one of the hardest workers everywhere she's been. She's been pushed to expand her game and play different positions and has thrived in each situation. She's excited to be a Zag, and we are excited to coach her." This is the fourth transfer edition for Gonzaga. This is the first one coming from the junior college ranks. The other three were all Division I transfers. That would be McKinley Dallin, a Washington native who was at Minnesota last year, Tanya Dalton, a New Zealand native who was at St. Mary's the last 4 years, their starting point guard, and Inez Betancourt, a transfer from UConn who was initially from Portugal. So 4 transfer additions for this team. They also have 3 incoming freshmen, including Lauren Whitaker, who is also from New Zealand. Part of the reason they were able to land Tanya Dalton there. Whitaker is a really promising front court player for this Gonzaga women's team joining the team. She actually joined them last year, but was ineligible to play for the second half of the season, but she was with the program starting in, I think, December or January for last year. They got 2 other freshman guards coming in as well, and they need it. They need all these additions because they lost the Trunk twins. They're out of eligibility. They lost Brenna Maxwell. She's out of eligibility. So much of their depth is gone. Callie Stokes enters the transfer portal, indicates she's done playing basketball after multiple concussions. Bree Sallen-Bien has not transferred, but she had another injury and is out for next year and may not end up returning to basketball as well. Peyton Muma has transferred to Wyoming. You lose Naya Ojukwu to the transfer portal as well. A lot of starters and a lot of backups for this team all gone. Coach Fortier had a lot of work to do this offseason. Last year, she basically didn't have to do anything. Pretty much the whole team came back last year, and it showed in a dominant regular season for this program. That's not going to be the case this year. They still got some great players. Maud Hybens is back. Of course, Yvonne Ejim is back. That's the big one to have back. So they still got some talent. They got some players who are going to step into bigger roles. Claire O'Connor was a freshman last year. I expect her to step into a bigger role. Tanya Dalton's certainly going to be a starter here after being a 4-year starter at St. Mary's. This team's going to be fine. They're going to be great next year. I have no doubt that they're going to be great. They're just going to look a lot different. And now they get a player coming over from the junior college ranks. Very excited to see what they have here. For Coach Fortier, for this staff to be able to identify talent that they want to bring to Spokane from the junior college ranks in Georgia, find me a harder working staff right now on the recruiting trail than that. They're adding players from Minnesota. They're adding players from UConn who are initially from Portugal. They're recruiting internationally in the freshman ranks, and they're adding junior college players from Georgia. That is a hard-working staff. They know the stakes. They know how hard it is to build and maintain talent on a roster. They know how tough it's going to be after losing so many key players, 2 players who were selected in the WNBA draft, a third who probably would have been if she hadn't had injury issues in Kaylee Trung. really talented departures for this program, but Coach Fortier and that staff, they are working hard to bring in talent to replace them. I'm very excited to see what this is all going to look like for them next season. Going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast, folks. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back tomorrow answering some of your mailbag questions. We'll be talking a bit about these new NCAA rulings, what it means for the Zags. We're also going to, later in the week, talk about Michael Ajayi, whether he stays, whether he goes. Once we have that decision in hand, we'll talk about what it means for Gonzaga as well. All coming up this week on Locked On Zags. Thanks again. And until next time, as always, go Zags.